Okay, Brill, guys, give me a shout if you can't see the slide. Hopefully you can. Welcome to the session. Really chuffed to announce the second year of the Cultures of Mountain Biking seminar series. Really quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the series or the group, Cultures of Mountain Biking, or CoMTB, we are the world's first research group to focus exclusively on why, how, and where mountain biking matters to people around the world. We're an interdisciplinary, culturally diverse, and global group of researchers whose aim it is to understand the social, cultural, and political significance of mountain biking in contemporary societies. We comprise members with backgrounds in art, community development, psychology, sociology, cultural studies, journalism, marketing, and coaching, among others, of course. And we're passionate about helping organisations to address a range of identities, bodies, environments, and inequalities. One of the methods, as you'll see today, that we go about doing this through is via our seminar series. So the seminar series is now in its second year, as I mentioned, and it takes place 4 times a year, as you'll see from the right-hand side of my slide here. And the whole point of this seminar series really is to encourage evidence-informed discussions between various different stakeholders and landowners and governing bodies and so on. And hopefully in the process of doing that, we're here to develop a joined-up approach to develop applied solutions to many of the world's most pressing problems. And those of you who know me that I make no apologies for making some quite broad claims about the power of mountain biking in contemporary societies in that regard. So yeah, this is the second year of the CoMTB seminar series, which is based on the success and the demand of the sessions last year. And what I've decided to do this year, again, if I can just draw your attention to the right-hand side of this slide, is to go for some themed-based sessions. The first of those today is around, broadly speaking, it's around inequalities in mountain biking. The next one in April will be around mountain bike trail building. The third theme in June will be around mountain bike advocacy, both local and regional and global. And the final one in November will be around the politics of mountain biking, broadly defined. You might note that in June and November, we're still seeking a speaker. So if you or anybody you know fancies talking on either the subject of advocacy and or the politics of mountain biking, then please do give me a shout. Okay, that's it from me. I'm sure you're here to hear from our 2 guests today, Fiona and Jai. So Fiona is from, I don't like really formal introductions, by the way, so I'll keep this short, but Fiona's from the University of Bristol in the UK, and Jai's from Newcastle University in Australia. And they're here to talk to us respectively about their research on women in mountain biking and Indigenous mountain bikers in Australia. I've asked, Fiona will go first. I've asked the 2 of them to speak for 20 minutes at a time. We won't have a break in between. We'll just go 20 minutes of Fiona's talk and then 20 minutes for Jai. And then that hopefully will leave us with lots of time at the end for some really interesting and informative discussion. To repeat, this is being recorded, so bear that in mind if you're turning your cameras on. The recordings will be uploaded to the CoMTB YouTube channel. So yeah, again, just bear that in mind if you're going to pop your cameras on. Right, that's it from me. I'll hand over to Fiona. Fiona, if you don't mind sharing your slides with us, that would be great.
No, not at all. Bear with. Does that work?
Fab.
Although the slideshow's not working. Okay. Yeah, is that okay?
Yes, great. Thank you.
So Fiona, I can now not see anyone at all. Just to warn you, because I have 2 screens and no people. So if there's a problem or anything happens, please can you vocalize that, if that's okay.
I'll moderate the discussion, Fiona, and also, sorry, I forgot to mention, if you've got any questions or anything you want to raise with Fiona or Jai, just pop them in the chat and we'll talk about those. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll do my absolute best to speak within 20 minutes. But full disclaimer, full disclaimer, I am today presenting a kind of extension of my existing research, which I have never presented before. It's data that we collected that I have only recently analysed, and I'm currently writing the paper from this data. So it's quite interesting to present it and talk about it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you all think. So I provocatively called this talk Sisters of Shred, Why Women-Only Communities in Mountain Biking Won't Solve Anything. And for anyone who knows me, they'll know that I lead women-only communities of mountain biking and have spoken very vocally about the need for them. So I am presenting a paradox, I'm presenting some conflicting ideas, but hopefully it'll all become clear by the end why I've called the talk this. So just a very brief note about me. My research focuses on women and women in mountain biking, particularly the way women navigate marketing and media, and the representation of mountain biking in our beautiful specialist media. And I'm interested today in talking about the role of women-only communities, but in the context of the cultural production practices that is what I call marketing and media, essentially the way that our culture of mountain biking is produced. So this research comes from a project that I lead called FIAS, Fostering Inclusive Action Sports. It's a large project. We do research, we develop frameworks and toolkits for different sectors, including policymakers, but also industry, and we develop evidence from their use in changing and shaping gender equality in mountain biking. And that is our starting point. So our starting point is and was that mountain biking is a type of sport, it's a type of action sport that has a traditionally masculine ethos. It's got a fascinating history. It was launched as a market-mediated consumption activity in the late 80s in the UK, and it was very much created with a very masculine Top Gear-esque, that's a very UK-based reference, but a kind of Top Gear-esque culture where male characters, very white male characters, were used to create this really fun, carefree culture, which really did at the time exclude most women in most forms. And this happened at a time in the history of sport where sport as a leisure activity was always a male domain and had masculinity infused into its kind of authentic participation. And if you look at the history of sport broadly beyond the realms of mountain biking, you can see this the themes of women as being inferior and frail, and as real sport being done by men, which of course we're unpicking and challenging every single year. And as we know, the recent Olympics was entirely 50-50, which was the first time that had ever happened. But action sports were developed in kind of the mid 80s, late 80s, as a form of sport that was supposed to be different from mainstream sport. They were developed with a kind of more participatory, cooperative ethos, a means of self-expression, a means of self-control, lacking rules and hierarchical structure. And I love all the literature that talks about action sports, including things like snowboarding and skateboarding, from around that time, because the authors talking about those sports, including mountain biking, wrote that because they lacked this hierarchical structure, they were different to mainstream sports. They were about flow and engaging with nature, and in informality. They could, if promoted, open up alternative values and become spaces for women and other marginalized groups to feel more at home in sport. And the crucial phrase there is if promoted, because since those early days, research has consistently focused on the fact that that's not what was promoted in mountain biking, and that the media marketing representation of mountain biking, as well as other action sports, has actually reproduced a kind of hegemonic masculinity, as much as coverage of traditional sports. So we're at a really interesting moment in the history and the development of mountain biking, where we are living in a post Black Lives Matter era, a post Me Too era, and we're much more aware. And you can see what happens when sports are developed. Today, in this day and age, at this moment in history, things like gravel biking are developing with a very different history, a very different sense of stickiness of these old masculine ethos. So we're trying to undo 40 years of masculinization in mountain biking. So our research from the beginning of Project FIAS was about how women navigate masculine sports cultures. And we asked lots of questions about how they make sense of masculine sports cultures, how they got recruited into mountain biking, and what the role is of mountain biking marketing and media in shaping the cultures of the sport. And I was really interested to know what we can do to change gender inequality in mountain biking. And for those of you, I'm sure everybody on this call knows, but mountain biking is generally thought to have an 80-20 gender split. I have seen a lot of much more negative gender splits out there, but I tend to stick to about 80-20 is what most people agree with. So we did heaps and heaps of research, which is continuing. This slide is horrible, there's too many words on it, but essentially you can see that we've done content analysis of mountain bike magazines, but also lots and lots of engagement with women who mountain bike, women who don't mountain bike, teenage girls who don't mountain bike, and more recently ethnography in women-only communities, and particularly draw your attention to the interviews with, it's actually 18 media and marketing experts who work on the cultural production side of mountain biking. Now you have to forgive me now because I'm going to skip some slides because I'm not going to talk about these. This was a presentation left over from a previous study, a previous presentation. And I want to skip to this. At the moment, all of our research, and some of you on the call I know have heard me present this before, but the research that we have done with women engaging with marketing and media and with the culture of mountain biking really indicates that what we say about mountain biking doesn't fully represent how women engage with it, and it causes some problems. So women we talked to told us they love the flow, the fear, the freedom, the passion of being in the outdoors, the sense of achievement, the challenge, the progression, and there's also a good smattering of coping and stress relief in there as well. Beautiful stories, amazingly articulate representations that women told me about how that and why they love mountain biking, and yet we don't see that in the studies we don't see that in the marketing and media that we tend to associate with our sport. And that's really important. So the women that we talked to tended to conclude that we don't show that mountain biking can be anything, that biking has the ability to be everything. We just don't show that. And there's also a sense of hierarchy that the women noticed, that women aren't allowed to be average. We're not allowed to be average. You've either got to be proper senders or you are mums going out for a pedal. So there are inconsistencies between how women engage with mountain biking as a sport and what they see in the marketing and media, and that is important. I'm not going to talk about the theoretical framework that I used, but I am going to talk about the media practices that we concluded from our analysis of this swathe of data. We found that women disengaged from mountain bike culture, that they rejected mountain bike culture, and that they curated their own through their own social media practices. So in brief, because this isn't what I want to focus on really, we found that women disengage from mountain bike culture as they see it in the magazines, and the magazines remain incredibly important in mountain bike culture. So they are not just your published paper magazines, but online as well. And it got to the point where I actually felt like a fool asking women whether they read magazines and what they read, because they just said, no, women read those magazines, they're not for us. There was a general sense of them not being for us. This is important because it and all the academic literature on action sports and media representation shows us that cultural representation of mountain biking provides us all with the symbolic resources with which to connect with the sport. When I'm talking to industry, I always talk about deep engagement as being good for business. If you can get your consumers to fall in love with mountain biking, to connect incredibly deeply as a lifestyle, as a way of living, they'll spend money on their true love. And women struggle often to feel that deep connection with mountain biking because they, as this quote says, self-consciously underneath it all knew it was off the table. They know there's no other women there, there's no role models, and the culture is very male dominated. So the women that we interviewed as part of the original FIAS project really demonstrated to us that they were mountain bikers and they had connected with it, but it was despite, not because of, the cultural representation of the sport. And as a result, they struggled to forge these deep, legitimate connections. They felt they looked ridiculous. I have endless quotes like this where they say, "Am I allowed to be scared? No one seems to be scared." And this can cause a sense of habituated subordination, where women feel that they are not proper mountain bikers. They told me repeatedly, even though I had actually been for a mountain bike ride with them before I did the interviews, that they weren't proper mountain bikers. They weren't proper because they weren't rad enough. They couldn't participate in mountain biking in the way that they felt they had to be legitimately part of the sport. And the only way, of course, they know what that legitimate participation looks like is through what we say about it in our cultural production, so in our marketing and media. Mountain biking features so rarely in mainstream media that the niche media, the specialist media that we have, has a disproportionately important role to play. I'm going to skip through some of these as well. Bear with me. So, women disengaged because of this lack of symbolic resources. They disengaged with mountain bike culture, but they engaged with the sport and the feelings that they got from the sport in their own right. As I said, I have endless quotes like this. I feel a bit ridiculous. I feel self-conscious. I feel too old. I feel like I'm not going to be able to do it. I feel vulnerable. Bear in mind that these were women who were mountain biking, but they, as I said, they forged these connections despite, not because of, the culture that we create in magazines and in marketing. So in that context, we have this sense of rejection, and the women often reacted quite angrily, and reacted that mountain bike culture wasn't for them, and it didn't matter because they were going to do their own thing. It's big groups of lads. I've got no interest of joining that, and I'm going to do my own thing. And one of the ways that they use social media is to connect with others and to forge women-only communities. Now, this piqued my interest because as a mountain biker myself for a long time, I've never had a group of women that I ride with. It was quite a surprise to me. I feel like I'm institutionalized into riding with men, and I enjoy it. But pretty much every woman said the same thing to me in the interview, which was they discovered mountain biking often through men, and at some point in their journey, they discovered riding with the women, and this woman says it so beautifully. It's quite a life-enhancing thing. The conversation, the crack, the going along, the following those people's lives, that doesn't involve the rest of mountain bike culture. It's irrelevant. So women-only communities have become a really big part of the Project FIAS. We became obsessed with them. We interviewed 20 community catalysts all over the country who have set up women-only or women-led communities for off-road cyclists. We've learned about what they've done, why they do it, what happens on those rides, why they're so special, why they're so important. And we've learned a lot. We've heard a lot. I say we, my research associate, Maria, who I think is on the call as well, did most of those interviews. So I should make sure she gets a shout out for that. And there's a real sense of a lack of hierarchy, a lack of competitiveness, a really important environment that women feel that they can connect deeply with the sport of mountain biking, with the feeling of mountain biking, and with other people on the ride. I get a different energy from the women. We've also done, as I said, ethnography. We're spending time with women-only communities, and it's incredible hearing how people talk about the rides. And to be absolutely clear, these are not women who are beginners necessarily. They can be absolute senders. I've talked to women who have raced, Enduro World Series races, who still ride with women-only communities because it provides something that is this very, very different energy, this lack of competitiveness, this very nurturing environment where they found that they could be themselves and they could actually progress a lot faster than they did in mixed gender environments. So it's very interesting. As a result of all this research, Project FIAS, we developed a toolkit for supporting women-only communities, supporting them of women to set them up, to get them off the ground, to recruit and diversify the members of those groups, to ensure that women on those rides have a positive experience, and to ensure that they that women are sustained, the riders in those groups are sustained, are retained, and that the groups sustain, thrive, and grow. That toolkit is available for anyone to download, and we did that in collaboration with our amazing partners, which include IMBA and also Forestry England. And I know Dan Cook's on the call, so thank you so much for all your support all the way through that. But the title of this talk is that women-only communities won't change anything, which is why I want to move on to talk about the cultural production industries and the sector that I think we have to turn our attention to if we're really going to get to grips with how we can progress gender inequality in mountain biking. I think women-only communities play a really, really important part, but we can't leave it all to those groups to foster change. And without ensuring that there is diversification and more representation of women in the cultural production industries in mountain biking, I don't think we are going to achieve sustainable, long-lasting, future-proof change in mountain bike culture. As part of Project FIAS, we mapped out all the different practices that we see as part of the ecosystem of mountain biking. And we came back time and time again to the male-dominated leadership in the cultural production industry, so in marketing and in media. That includes editorial, writing, journalism, videography, photography, but also on the brand management and marketing side as well. And that absolutely connects and links to the male-dominated media marketing representation that we see in the media. And without shifting those sides of mountain biking, I don't feel that we are going to make enough change and allow women to feel that mountain biking is a place for them. So that's why we have the FIAS framework, which has mountain bike community in the middle, but also has other sections of the framework, which when we work with this framework with organizations, we always say, building mountain bike communities for women is so important, but that has to be a way for women to feel that they're not segregated into riding only allowed to ride in women-only communities. We have to allow and proactively foster pathways between participation in mountain biking as mountain bikers and into its leadership and into its cultural production sides, into its industry. And so very briefly then, I want to just touch on some of the things that the marketing and media professionals told me in the interviews. As I said, this paper will be available to read in depth soon. But I think it's really important to have a look at some of the ways that there are dynamics at play in the gendered nature of that cultural production industry. I've taken out all the names on purpose. I think the first thing to say is that the PR directors, the marketing directors that I spoke to, as well as the women themselves, the mountain bikers that I spoke to, all say the same thing, which is that special interest media is the gatekeeper and the validator of our sport, and everybody is absolutely clear that it's so important. So we've got to get it right. There are, of course, lots of different forms of marketing and media that we talk about. We have lifestyle content, we have product news stories, test reviews, advertorial, and advert. They are kind of on a sliding scale of editorial freedom. So there's more kind of editorial content to the left of this screen and more marketing content to the right of this screen. But there's a huge entanglement between all of these different forms of media content. And I know I've only got a minute left, but I just wanted to point to a couple of the things that people say. First of all, there are really strong gender dynamics at play. There was often women told us that they were the only women working on cycling titles. Often those women left as well. Some of the women we interviewed left during the piece of research that we did. There's also a really important industry dynamic at play that seems to be shaping the way that women can progress in that industry. It seems to be that the bike industry is an enthusiast-led industry, which is understandable, but it's formed around informal networks. So it's about mates who know each other, particularly mates who've grown up riding bikes together. And obviously, given the gendered nature of those riding communities that we've already know so clearly, it's inevitable that the informal networks that create opportunities for people in the cultural production industries are also male dominated. And we have huge amounts of data that tell us that women struggle to gain traction in those industries and struggle to progress. And of course, that there's therefore a link between women working in those industries and the nature of the cultural production that gets produced and the gender balance in what we see in those magazines. I won't talk about that. I think it's fair to say that there is a societal discourse underpinning a lot of the change and a lot of the ambition for people within those industries to change. There is a sense that progress is happening, that mountain biking is growing up a bit. But there's also a good amount of myopia and subordination and essentialism in there as well. I had brand managers telling me that everything was fine, that cycling and mountain biking is pretty equal, suggesting that 80-20 equal is pretty equal, which obviously it isn't. But finally, I think I want to just highlight the fact that there are what I describe as entrepreneurs, gender progressive entrepreneurs working in the cultural production industry, both on the marketing side and the media side. Obviously, by opening myself up to interview these people, it was slightly self-selecting. So the people that were interested in gender progressive logics came forward. But I had a lot of comments like this one, which was really indicative of the frustration and the energy for change that we can see in marketing and media in the mountain biking industry. So this man, who's a global marketing director, said, you know, there's some really cool women doing some really cool stuff at World Cups and various other races like that. I was at Red Bull Hardline last week. This was last year, by the way. And they had like the first, when the pro member of this, I haven't changed this, sorry. There was a group of women that were going around at the same time. And I'm like, why isn't anybody capturing this? If I had a woman who was a pioneer of Red Bull Hardline for women, I would just put a camera crew with the women. That's the story. That's the story. They were absolutely sensational. So I want to just end there and on a note of positivity and say that my data is showing me that there are really strong, there's a really strong sense of positive gender progressive entrepreneurs working in marketing and media, but that we still have work to do in order to allow women to gain traction in those industries. And only by proactively allowing women to progress and thrive in the cultural production of mountain biking are we going to be able to allow women to see that that mountain biking is for them, because the gender balance in the cultural representation of mountain biking will be different. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Fiona. That was characteristically wonderful. Just a reminder, we'll come to questions at the end of Jai's presentation. So we'll hear from Jai first, and then we'll have approximately half an hour of questions at the end. If anything came up during Fiona's presentation that you have a question about and don't feel confident or comfortable airing that in public, please do pop these questions in the chat for us to come back to at the end. Jai, if you're ready.
Yeah, can you hear me okay there, Jim?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Jai, if at any point, because of your connection, you start to break up a little bit, I'll just give you a shout and perhaps you can maybe turn the camera off at that point if the connection isn't great. But hopefully everything will be okay. Lovely. Thanks, Jai.
All good. No worries.
Over to
Thanks,
you.
Jim. And thanks, Fiona, too. There's some really clear parallels there, and a lot of work. I'll clarify that what I am presenting on is not a research project. This is a program, a set of programs that were delivered, over a decade ago, and I've really wanted to do a research project on it, but other things, so pulling it out into a theoretical lens is yet to be done, but there's plenty of material, a lot of raw data in there. What I'm going to present will show a lot of imagery, so there'll be a lot of text, but if you are listening in, you might pick up quite a few concepts, and a lot of the similar stuff that Fiona was talking about, you'll see some similar concepts coming out of this too. I'm a mountain biker. I'm an adaptive cyclist. I've got arthritis, and so mountain biking's been a way for me to access nature and social engagement as well. And in this regard, I'm presenting as Gubbar. So the etymology for that is it's a derivative of governor. In some ways it can be an insult, but you can reclaim that too. So I'm presenting as the descendant of settler colonialists here in Australia. I'm also now a consultant with a regional institute with the University of Newcastle, and I do continually work with the Indigenous community. So I work with Purai, the research centre at the University of Newcastle. The image that you're looking at there is from Uncle Dickie Campbell, and that's the Echidna Dreaming. I've entitled this the Mountain Bike Dreaming, and looking at bringing those two dreamings together of the Gubbar dreaming and an Aboriginal dreaming. The artwork there is Indigenous Art Code approved, so Uncle Dick was rewarded appropriately for the work, and it represents that journey through the landscape. The echidna is the one animal that is across all of Australia, and you can see its food there, the ants that it's chasing as it works its way across. I also want to give authorship of this to Dunghutti country. At the moment, I'm coming to you from Mullumbimba, which is a Wabigal name for Newcastle. We were given all these colonial names here, but most of this work occurred mostly on Dunghutti country and also with a bit of Biripi and Gumbaynggirri country. A trigger warning too, there's racist language in here as well. And so try to acknowledge that. And I'd also like to acknowledge any Indigenous people who are here with us, watching and listening. Sovereignty has never been ceded here in Australia, and I assume in a lot of parts of the world as well. The mountain bike dreaming brings this together. So I'll go back to 1897, and thanks to Georgine Claassen for finding this one. Click. This is actually from Kempsey, which is a regional part of New South Wales, and I'll put on my best settler colonial voice to read this out. Also thinking in terms of anyone, we're doing intersections of disadvantage, so anyone who's got a reading impairment. As a proof of the advancement of our dusky brethren in this district, I may mention that the darkies here take great interest in cycling. One of the blackfellows at the Burnt Bridge camp now owns a bike, and he may be seen gaily pedalling his way along any day in the vicinity of Kempsey. He has not, however, shown up in town on his wheel yet, though that will come. The Aborigines here imitate the white man in all ways. Was this perhaps in 1897 the world's first Indigenous mountain bike program? We make the claim that in 2009 we kicked off. Maybe somebody will correct me that there's been other work and there's been another Indigenous mountain biking program that preceded this. But yeah, it was about 2009, and I was living in Port Macquarie, which is it's north of Sydney, between Sydney and Brisbane on the coast. And I was working in Kempsey. I have had a history of working with the Indigenous community. I was working in community natural resource management at the time. And I thought, every now and again, I'd ride up. It's about 50 Ks. And if you want to talk about a post-apocalypse landscape, Jim, car wrecks, illegal dumping in the state forest, firewood gathering, some of it legal, cash cropping, wild dogs. And so you're also going through this sort of what we call blocky territory. Blockies are small landholders that don't really have viable farms. So lifestylers, but also a really impoverished area of the coast too. So not particularly secure, and a lot of regional paranoia. And I'd be pedalling into Kempsey, coming in through South Kempsey, which is and Burnt Bridge, which is one of the most disadvantaged areas of Australia, on a $4,000 bike. And the club had started to build trails on the south side of Kempsey as well, outside the golf club. No Indigenous engagement. And yeah, I'm riding my flash bike in through South Kempsey, and I'm thinking, what's wrong with this picture? Just another day in the colony. And so I spoke to some friends, and they said, go and speak to Hector and Jamie and see if we can get a mountain bike program up. And go, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, so and ran with it. I'll also point out, like Kempsey's so disadvantaged. There's a real polarisation there. Colonisation has left Indigenous people without management of land. And so in a lot of ways, people are either on one side of the welfare system or the other. One of its biggest industries is the jail. And so Indigenous incarceration is a big issue there too. So Dunghutti Sport and Rec, this is Jamie Tidy and Hector Ritchie. And that's Uncle Dick there, who's the artist. But it's mainly Jamie and Hector that helped drive this project. I'll also point out Cultural Load too. This is Jamie and Brad Steins. That's me back in the days when I had more hair. Hector has looked through the materials with me too, but it's very early in Australia at the moment, so he's not getting up that early. Ben Bowen from the National Centre for Indigenous Excellence wanted to join us today, but he had a double booking, and Jamie's got 9 kids. So in terms of that sort of, the responsibilities in the Aboriginal community, I'm going to try and do the best thing that I can as an ally and represent this fairly, as opposed to saying, hey guys, can you come along and do another free presentation? Sorry, we don't have a budget for this, but I'll get you to get up in front of an international cohort of mountain bikers. And no, not really. So I'm taking on the cultural load here. So these are a few of the Dusky brethren. Lisa, Bradley, Dennis, Jamie, and others. And I love this day. This was one of the first days we started, and I'm sitting up at West Kempsey and next to Russ Kavanagh, who was with Aboriginal Legal Aid. And I had my fingerless bike gloves and I was pulling them on, and we just looked at each other, and he looked me straight in the eye. He's done a lot of work in Northern Territory in the intervention, and so he says Mexico 68. We said it almost in unison, and so we shared a black glove each as they did in 68. So I got to be the token white man, and look, I've been really privileged in this role to work alongside Dunghutti, but before long we had a whole mob of us fulfilling that dream from Town and Country in 1897, where we were riding through Kempsey. The bikes that we had sourced were initially recycled bikes from the men's shed, pulled them out of the tip and recycled them. As we went on, we managed to get funding and extend the program. So what did we do? Primarily, it was a youth program. That was the main thing that we were targeting at. Obviously, bit of edge work there. I used to say to the young guys, I'm a drug dealer, and they'd be like, what? Because they're like, who are you? This gabbar that's working with us? And they're thinking, oh, this is your sly way of getting into the Aboriginal community and dealing some drugs. No. I deal adrenaline, guys. This stuff's, if you get addicted to bikes, it's more expensive than speed. So N+1. But the other big part of the program was our work with the mentors. And so it was a broad social project throughout Kempsey. We had engagement with the club. Up there on the left is Jason Shelley from the Kempsey Mountain Bike Club, and he also owns a local hardware. So here, have a heap of tools. We engaged as a schools program. So no school, no mountain biking. Out west in the outback, they go no school, no pool. And here all the kids wanted to go mountain biking. So unless you've been to school, you can't be a truant and go on the program. Got funding through Department of Health and Aging, so sport and rec guys. So you go out and you take these guys for a ride, and they're real. This is a real privilege to be able to go out with the Aboriginal community and crossing those barriers, and with the aim of closing the gap. So there are real significant disparities in socioeconomic standing, so health and education, housing, life expectancy, and we did a range of things in terms of mechanics, trail building, nutrition, literacy and numeracy, stick the Garmin on the guys and then go and graph their ride and look at their heart rate. And so it was a real practical way of giving them some things that they could take back to school and find some relevance. So yeah, we started in 2010 on tip bikes, got grants to be able to buy some decent quality hardtails. Most of the mentors were men. We did have some women involved as well. Trail building. I got my MTB coach qualification and used that to help cover the insurance because Dunghutti Sport and Rec didn't really have much of an organisational structure. It was just Facebook group and a bunch of people. And of course, got to be able to engage everyone. So family is everything in the community, using the resources of people's backyards and, doing all your bike maintenance and everything. And we did get extra funding, say from ETC, which is an employment and training company in Kempsey, got the jerseys done and converted the colours to green, black, white, which is the Dunghutti key colours and evocative of the forest. So we're in forest country at the coast there, as opposed to the desert colours. And by 2012, we're looking pretty schmick. That's me and John and Richie. We had grants, we had better quality bikes. I was on commission for some of the work, but a lot of love was going into it as well. And we were just a little group up the coast. And we got in touch with the National Centre for Indigenous Excellence in Redfern. And they invited us, come down. So they came up and saw what we're doing. They started replicating that at a national, statewide level, extending it out into New South Wales. And so they started the Indigenous Mountain Bike Project. Jamie there, sporting the shirt with pregnant with number 9. So we had a ready-made mountain bike team just with Jamie's family. By 2013, they'd invited us down to Sydney to do a 24-hour endurance race. And we also noticed that, when you start moving as a mob, the girls start getting involved too. Obviously, a lot of those intersections with what Fiona was saying, issues of shame, safety. For Aboriginal people to go out just into the state forest in those areas is quite intimidating. They're worried that they're going to get attacked by some rednecks dogs who's on the fringes of town, and scared that someone's going to come and stick a shotgun in their face. So I was in that position of, they'd be safe if they're riding with me. But not necessarily that happens, but there's a lot of paranoia in those areas too. So there, we had the Jet Black 24, pretty much took over the scene. There was such a big number of Kempsey kids who'd come down to Sydney, and they all moved as a mob and a really big presence. So it felt like in some ways we were reversing colonisation and doing the reverse of the invasion. Always when you go across country, so we're on Darug and Tharawal country down there, you have to go and check in with people and say, hey, yeah, we're Dunghutti and we're coming down. And usually there's some connections and someone's family and someone who's, grandma got displaced or stolen. So there's always a liaison whenever you're crossing country. And because, Ben and Sean at the National Centre for Indigenous Excellence had stepped up and started to get engaged, it was an opportunity for me as an ally to step back. And they came up and said, we'll run the world's first Indigenous Mountain Bike Cup, 2014 in Port Macquarie, and took over an area that is named after one of the first of the governors of Australia, Governor Macquarie. And this is on Biripi country. And so created that Indigenous only space right there in the heart of Port Macquarie. There's Sean Apu, and these are a lot of the mentors, kids that got into the racing. So I was able to step back and a bit of a handover. We're at 2014, 2015. The program ran its course, and there's some learnings there in terms of, not setting Aboriginal people up to expect sport to be an end in itself. There's a lot of pressure, make a career out of being a footballer and then somebody's knees go and they don't have a future. And so that can lead to a lot of disillusion within the Aboriginal community. So we're mindful when you're engaging along these lines, not to over create unrealistic expectations, and just to see that there's a whole series of other benefits in terms of the social determinants of health. By 2015, ICE had really started to hit CoMTB, and so these are the intersections. Colonisation is an ongoing process. The invasion has not stopped, and now it happens just in other forms. So I started moving into CoMTB. Jamie took, she's got 9 kids, so she's going to Western Sydney to get the kids out of that area, and thinking, because otherwise it'll go through the family. And I started getting further engagement with the university down here in Mullumbimby, Newcastle. And other things impacted it, so that, community dysfunction, so drugs and divorce and acquisition of the equipment and so forth. So yeah, a bit of a moment in time. Australia also has moved on, so other struggles became important. We've made some progress. Things like acknowledging country has succeeded, the God Save the Queen, or those other types of rituals in Australia. Dual naming is emerging. If you have an event in Australia, it's really common to do a smoking ceremony if you want to purify and, get rid of the bad spirits. And revival of language in a range of different ways. The referendum for the voice failed, and we still got to change the date of Australia Day and so forth. So there's still plenty of work to do, and a treaty. So there's plenty of campaigns and ongoing engagement. There's a lot of the material that you will have seen here. There is a body of data that hasn't really been analysed, and yet it's still there. Still some video material. So these are some of the videos. We were covered nationally by SBS, which is the multicultural broadcasting channel. So mainstream media gave us coverage, but yeah, we never managed to break in. I took some Enduro mags and Mountain Bike Australia mags to meet the first meeting with Jamie and Hector, and I said, "Oh, look, it's all white guys," and they were like, "Oh yeah, we should get some black fellas in there too," So we never really managed to break through into that mountain bike media, but on the other hand, doing some of that, the black grapevine media, developing up with new media, so social media, so doing your own videos, and so there is a body of material that's out there. So yeah, I'm still working in the field, and Jamie and Hector and others have helped me out with doing research, which I hope will help the Indigenous community. More important is about them, into truth-telling in education, in the New South Wales education system, and yeah, quite a few learnings there. So yeah, there's a bit of a dual history here in Australia of Gubbar and Aboriginality. Mountain biking sits as an opportunity to share that dreaming. There's obvious limits along a range of different things, even just the affordability, and for Aboriginal people to go and be riding a flash bike around means that they've indulged in some way in an individualist activity. While you're doing that, when our families struggle, so there's all those issues of gear cost and the shame of being wealthy. So a whole range of different aspects to look at there too. But mountain biking has given, as a technology, been a really good way to bridge a few barriers, and still some work to do. How do I go timing wise?
That's magic. Yeah, spot on. Thank you so much, Jai. Fantastic work. Really interesting stuff. Brilliant. Well, thank you to both of you. I guess just to draw the two presentations together, it seems like we've got three distinct themes going on here, if you like, that kind of reflect the remit of CoMTB and the things we're interested in. One is, it's great to hear. I always like hearing from two presenters that are kind of doing their research or applying their trade in two very different parts of the world. Obviously, we've got a kind of UK-based case study in Fiona's work, and then a uniquely Australian case study in yours, Jai. And I think what cuts across both presentations is that we can sometimes find local solutions to what can often be global problems. In this case, colonialism and gender inequalities, which are something that we experience both in sport and in society, regardless of where we are in the world. It's just that both in your case studies, we've got some kind of local solutions to these global problems. So that was really nice to hear. It's always nice to hear about these local issues, but also about issues that are, it's safe to say, largely unfamiliar to those of us in the UK. It's really only until I started engaging with people in this seminar series that I realised the extent of colonialism and problems between kind of settlers and indigenous populations across the world, and how prominent that was in mountain biking. So thanks, Jai, for that. I think the second thing to say is there's clearly there's the issue of intersectionality here across both presentations. We're talking about gender. We're talking about, Jai, you mentioned how gender might intersect with some of the issues faced by these indigenous communities, Aboriginal communities. Both of you, I think, have talked about kind of location, about the economy, about how capitalism might be at fault here for some of these problems, as well as colonialism. But I think on the whole, what both presentations truly represent is the power of mountain biking, both in a negative and a positive sense. Great to see that mountain biking can be instrumental in bringing about long-term and sustainable forms of change. But by the same token, I think, Fiona, your presentation clearly shows that there is still progress to be made there. And actually, despite the opportunities that mountain biking provide, actually, in many ways, it can actually end up reinforcing some of those inequalities rather than actually addressing them and deconstructing them. So thank you to both of you. We've had one comment about about your toolkit, Fiona, but no comments, no questions on the chat. So this is a good point if anybody's got them to ask questions of to Fiona and Jai. Has anybody got any questions in the audience? Right, Alistair. Hi, Alistair.
Hey, Jim. Thanks for this, and thanks, Fiona and Jai. That was both really, really interesting. I had a quick question for Fiona around the kind of production of mountain biking media, and I was wondering if the sort of what I suppose you could think of as almost a collapse in sort of traditional mountain biking media over the last decade or so has kind of realised an opportunity for people to kind of drive a bit more diverse engagement in the kind of representation of mountain biking, or has the kind of more social media, more kind of individual control of how mountain biking is represented, has that sort of been captured by the same approaches, by the same restrictions, the same priorities that the traditional media had before? Yeah,
it's a good question. I mean, I think there's a number of different dynamics at play in the current media. I think I went into this assuming that I would conclude that actually, mountain bike magazines are dead. They're gone. They're from a bygone era. But I was completely bowled over by their continued significance. They are so important in any form, in printed or in digital form. They are so important for consumer engagement with mountain biking, but also they play a really important role in product innovation and learning, industry side learning. I heard from people that engineers and product designers on the in brands read, scour the reviews from magazines across the world to see what other brands are up to and what people think of their own products. So they remain incredibly important for as cultural gatekeepers to the sport. There's obviously perhaps a wider range of the types of content that gets into those digital magazines, and there's certainly institutional pressures which came across a lot in the interviews with media professionals when I focused on these institutional entrepreneurs who were driving gender progressive logic, and they really do care. They can see there's a lot of reflexivity, there's a lot of, oh my goodness, I read Invisible Women and now I can't unsee the gender dynamics at play in the world around me. There's a lot of gender progressive logic and ambition. But actually, when it comes down to it, a lot of the things that people wanted to try and put into place on the media side was stymied because of financial problems or because of the speed of turnaround in the digital content production. So if you are working for a digital, monthly magazine, you've got oodles of time to plan your content and try and find diverse voices and plan photo shoots with different people from different backgrounds to be in those shoots. But if you've got to bosh out material every single day, you just don't have the time to react. So that was happening, and you could see the dynamics had changed in that 10 years that you describe really clearly. Has actually, I think, stifled entrepreneurial effort. In terms of social media, I think that's changed the dynamics as well. And you have to think about the mountain bike magazines, even in their digital content, they are competing both with each other, but also with user generated content. People writing amazing blogs and posting Instagram footage. Our attention is divided and split across a whole load of different types of media. I hopefully that keeps people on their toes, because I think it's really important. And I often hear when I present the media practices research from the beginning of my presentation, people say, right, so women don't engage in the media. And I say, no, they don't engage in the published media. They absolutely are. They hunt out interesting blog stories, Instagram influencers, different types of media that's out there that's user generated content. And so it's fragmented our media landscape and changed it enormously. But the significance of those mountain bike magazines remains absolutely central to the culture of our sport.
Just as a quick aside, Fiona and Alistair, have you two met before?
No. Hi.
Well, just in the interests of networking, because I suppose that's partly why we're here. Alistair's a photographer, Fiona, and he, I believe, has done some work for UK broadsheets in the past. Have you, Alistair?
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a bit of news. And my work is quite often around how you represent people and how people represent themselves in imagery, particularly around the climate, but also in other stories too.
Amazing.
I think I'm right in saying as well, Alistair, haven't you done or are doing some work currently around Indigenous populations and how they're represented in, or how race is represented in photography? Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a previous piece of work is specifically looking on that and how you tell those stories very sort of ethically and morally, but also just generally how those dynamics are so caught up in documentary and photojournalism at all stages, and how often under-recognized that is, and how much work there is to be done. And it obviously cuts across environmental stories very significantly. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, and a really strong theme that's come out in the data, the interviews with marketing and media professionals, is this moment or experience of reflexivity. And so if you think about kind of this, it's very tempting and very easy to see how difficult it can be for people to recognize gender inequality if you work in a male-dominated white environment. Everyone around you is just like you, and I think there's a lot of frustration and anger from people who don't fit that description. But also we have to recognize that reflexivity is a journey, and it's something that we need to help people engage with conversations around different societal discourses that are actually challenge that position. And that's quite a challenge for people, and I think that's the first step. It's very easy to see, well, what, say, assume that everything comes down to obstinance or a willful failure to react, but actually I don't think it is at all. And I'm seeing the lack of gender progressive logic I see isn't because of misogyny, it's because of a lack of reflexivity. So that's like the first stage.
Yeah, I'd add to that. That experience in CoMTB is, both from both perspectives. From the Indigenous perspective, they'd be quite surprised when they're engaging with the community, whether that mostly club members or people like that, and then they'd go, the reflexivity had happened on the behalf of the club members. It's, you know, they might be out at the golf club doing their trail building and getting things going, and in one environment, you know, not necessarily either not think about the Indigenous community, not even to consult in a place like Kempsey is like, it's just not in your brain. But then as soon as they're engaged with, and they're like, oh yeah, here guys, yeah, have some tools, yeah, awesome, you know, and we saw that time and time again in a range of different environments. The mountain biker habitus is really kind of open to that, but not necessarily active in terms of, hey, I'm going to go out and do it, because we're individuals, you know, we're deeply involved in our own pursuit and trying to be great mountain bikers ourselves. So yeah, it's just bridging that little space there with, yeah, and reflexivity is that key word.
Great question, Alistair, and thanks, guys. So, Dan, you got a question?
I have, and yeah, extending my vocabulary range already. Need to go and look up reflexivity a bit more, I think. I think my question is really around not necessarily media created, but facilitating the right environment created, which cuts across both of your studies, I think. In that it seems to me, and much of my work and many others, is around facilitating an environment that supports broader engagement than currently exists. And we can start off with the support and create environments and groups of people who coalesce together and want to be with people like themselves. And clearly the next step, and you challenge this, Fiona, a little bit, I think, in terms of we need to not isolate people into their own groups of their own kind, and we need to facilitate an environment that broadens that out into some sort of progression, more integrated approach. And then even beyond that, I'm thinking about how do we then create some level of succession. So people have been involved in this, doing these roles for quite a long time, and I think you picked it up that quite a lot of the women involved in media are in there for a period, and then probably, and I'm paraphrasing or guessing, they probably just get fed up with that environment and can only cope with it for so long, and actually go and find somewhere else that they'd rather work, an environment that they'd rather work in. So I suppose my question is how do we better create that 3-stage long-term approach to create more environments that go from collectivism into integration, into leadership, ambassadorship, creating more visual, obvious representatives. Does that make sense? Is there any, you know, cues? How do we create that facility? How do we facilitate that environment better than we already are?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'd be interested to know the other speakers' views on this as well. But I mean, I think the FIAS framework, I always think, is kind of trying to interject at a point in mountain biking's trajectory and artificially change things that may happen anyway. In some ways, you know, the more women and marginalized people we can get into mountain biking, the more this enthusiast-led industry will develop. So we will naturally have more women around to apply for jobs. I hear time and time again, oh, women aren't applying for these jobs. Well, A, there are fewer women out there who are mountain biking who would be interested in working in the industry. And B, it's a male-dominated industry, so you've got to do something proactive to make this feel appealing to you, to women, if you want them. You know, don't blame the women is my point. So as we work at the bottom of the pyramid, and a lot of our work is about, and a lot of Forestry England's work is about, you know, creating environments environments that appeal. So we're getting children involved, we're getting adaptive riders involved, we're getting more and more women involved in mountain biking, and realizing all the benefits of this, you know, amazing kind of nature challenge activity, this outdoor sport. And that will change, you know, that will change in generations time. So we'll just have more people, more different people around. But in the meantime, I think we need to think about where there are gaps, where there's a stickiness, and there's a, you know, if we're seeing, and that's why I'm focusing on cultural production, because I think there is a stickiness there. Women are struggling to enter that sector, and they're leaving. And it's so important for the culture of mountain biking. So we need to focus on particular parts of that ecosystem and identify what's going on and put in proactive mechanisms in place. You know, ride leadership is a classic example. I think we know, and we know logically, but we know from the research as well, that the more women, people of colour, adaptive riders that we've got who are ride leaders, they act as role models for the next generation. They'll become trail association trustees, they'll run the kids clubs, they're the enthusiasts who are driving new initiatives in mountain biking, and we have to make proactive effort to recruit more of those people into ride leadership, and it's happening. So there are more and more people coming forward, more and more organisations, tutors, who are realising this is actually one small piece of a massive jigsaw that they have control over. There are lots of bits of that jigsaw we don't have control over, but we can recruit more women into ride leadership, and that is happening, I think.
Yeah, I'd add to that the power of the symbolic. And that's really obvious in the Indigenous community. It's the series of symbolic actions, and you mentioned the language that gets used. I've got a series of shibboleths that I just roll out, and it's like, oh, okay, you're all right, and you got to get called Captain Cook White Sea a few times and take some of that, that symbolic violence, and go, oh yeah, of course I am, I'm a land grabber, and go through a little bit of that to get acceptance in the community, and then also create that long-term space and understanding. So both on the verbal and the visual, I just grabbed I've still got my jersey, and that's a physical thing that's gonna last over time, and a heap of people in the community all have that, and they can go out and they can ride and they can say, oh yeah, this is me, I'm part of this, so that sense of inclusion, and then it gets visually represented. But then there's the actions, the things that we actually do, realizing that when you're going out on a ride, that there's the ways in which you interact with people, with the Indigenous community in the bush, is going to be a whole series of different interactions. I've got two daughters, and I've ridden plenty with as just the lone male with women in the bush, and there's a whole series of considerations there. So that the acts, the verbal, the visual, so that power of symbolic's really, really important.
Yeah, and it's good to hear that some of the stuff I've been doing for a while is coming to fruition, and these things just take time, and it's, for me, it's about trying to accelerate them as best we can, I suppose, and yeah, very much keen to continue to work in collaboration to make these things happen. But yeah, we'll carry on doing what we can to get that representation out, really.
I think actually working collaboration is really important as well, and also something that something that I think that brings is this sense of standpoint. You can only see things from your own point of view, and one of the things I've noticed in the research, particularly with people that I've spoken to on either the policy side or the cultural production side, is there's a real difference between people who are open to learning from other people's standpoints and other people's perspectives, and people who are so for not their own fault, but just desperately wrapped up in the institutional dynamics of their everyday lives. And that's really challenging. I mean, Forestry England's a great example, because Forestry England is there to, you have lots of priorities, but ultimately I'm working with a Forestry England organisation and Forest of Dean, and I regularly, the people I work with who are so open and wanting to create amazing environments for women and do really progressive things, they send me an email and they say, I'm really sorry, but we've had a storm and the trees have all fallen down and we've got to go and clear the trails. They've got daily work to do. They've got to manage the forest in a safe way for all forest users, and yet at the same time are trying to progress different activities to make sure that their environment is and their offers are open to women. And you can see the juggle is really, really challenging, but I think working collaboration is the only way we can do this. We all have we can all learn, and I think we can, organizations that are involved in mountain biking, whether that's media, marketing, landowners, whatever, can work in collaboration with others and try and see things from a different perspective. And I think that's why conferences and events like the IMBA conference, Reframing Mountain Biking, which is coming up in the UK in a couple of weeks, these are really good opportunities to step outside of our day jobs and hear from other people, and things like this as well. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's been really useful. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. We've still got 15 minutes left if anybody has any final questions before we wrap up.
Yes, IMBA Summit is in Spain this year.
Oh, is that Yari? Yeah.
Yeah.
I do actually have, if you can stick around 10-15 more minutes, guys, I do actually have a question for both of you, if you don't mind. I'll start with you, Fiona. I don't know if you've had this one yet. Apologies if this is becoming like something you're answering all the time at these dues. But I wonder if you've got any thoughts on the developments in the way that UCI is being covered, and some of the announcements that are formally being made in some cases, and in some cases kind of coming out of internet forums and stuff like that. So the main ones being like the Discovery are now charging ridiculous amounts of money. The other ones being the kind of rule changes around like the smaller field of riders, which I imagine might have an impact on women, perhaps more than men. But then there are, it seems to me, some positive developments in that the commentary team now is quite mixed and diverse. Any thoughts on that?
Yes and no. I'm still formulating my ideas around this. I mean, our research is very much at the moment focused on participatory, non-formal organisation of mountain biking. So we've steered well away from racing. That said, and actually, interestingly, one of our arguments for that was that in mountain biking, unlike some other sports, there is a significant gap often between our daily consumption of mountain biking as kind of punters, the way that we participate, and its racing, its heroes. There are obviously people we follow and watch, but they're not that present. They should be, perhaps. We should have more heroes, and heroes play a really important role in the stories that we tell about the sport. But actually, for most mountain bikers, they wouldn't have a clue who's racing in the World Cup, or what the different forms of racing are in mountain biking, and how and why you'd want to dial into a UCI race in the first place. So we haven't focused on that. I think there's a really important role, as I said, for that visual representation. That's a form of visual representation of our sport. It's important. It sets the scene. And actually, when we did the content analysis for the FIAS project, it happened to coincide with the Fort William World Cup, and so there was an increased representation of women in particularly Single Track magazine, which made a concerted effort to present the results for both women and men in very, very equal terms in the magazine. So it does play an obvious role in how we construct the stories and tell stories about the sport. So it's a problem then if that becomes something else, which is behind paywalls and carved out and chopped around by institutional dynamics that we don't have any control over. And it's a shame. It's sad. I haven't got anything to say about the reduced fields, because I don't really know what the implications of that are going to be yet.
Nice one, thank you. Jai, I'm just wondering what the power of mountain biking is specifically in engaging these communities of people that you've been working with, and whether you think there's any difference in motivation to do that in any of those countries where colonialism is a problem. So I'm thinking of like many of the countries where this is a problem and where mountain biking is being used. I don't know if you've met or spoken to Tavis Smith in Canada, for example. He's another CoMTB member, but he's suggesting that trail building can be quite useful. And I know obviously in New Zealand this is an issue. I just wondered what the power of mountain biking was specifically, and whether that might be different depending on time, place, location. But I imagine that the power of mountain biking and trail building in Canada might be very different to what it is in Australia. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's ephemeral. It's got a real, it's quite flexible in a lot of ways, and so you can just go, all right, we're running a program now, and then yeah, look what we did. It was a moment in time and then dissipated. I had done the same thing 6 or 7 years beforehand with an Indigenous canoe kayak program, and engaged that with water quality education, natural resource management work, so cultural perspective on riparian perspective on the world too. So yeah, look, mountain biking is ephemeral. In a community like Kempsey, or I would imagine maybe similarly in BC, that things such as team sports have quite a significant place in the community. If you're in Kempsey, you play for a club and all of your mates, and you move together, and so the team sports are really critical. Around that same time, if you don't know the Australian perspective, we got rugby league is the dominant code in this area, and Australian rules is predominantly the majority of Australia, but had moved into this area somewhat. And so you get this split in the community of, you're playing Aussie rules and you're playing rugby league, and mountain biking just sort of steps into those spaces as this individualized sport, with, of course, problematic in some ways in terms of the gear and the individualism that goes with that, but also here's an individual activity that, all right, well, you pick up some of the loose ends, some of the kids that just aren't fitting in, not necessarily not just physically unable to play rugby league, but maybe socially having a few issues. And we had individual kids that I know who were coming to us, and it's like, you could pick them up, and basically a diversionary program. So fitting into that space with that flexibility of being able to come and go. Other reflections, that you can engage people in the community who might not necessarily engage. You might have a bike advocate who's really keen on bike safety, and here's an opportunity to engage with the Aboriginal community on a few things. I mean, the helmet discourse in Australia is really a big issue, and that well, in some ways it's an elephant in the room culturally, and it leads to what we call the trifecta. No helmet, cop pulls you up, offensive language, assault police. That's the trifecta. Incarceration. It's a really quick, negative engagement with authority that Indigenous community has. So for me to go out and go, look, this is not about the law, guys. Nothing to do with the law. If you're not wearing a helmet, you're not riding hard enough. And putting it into a different language of why you're wearing that thing when you go mountain biking, and then it becomes okay. Yeah, we can talk about that. And when you go out on the streets, discretion's the better part of valor. Stick a lid on when you're down at the skate park so the cops don't go and harass you. And you're actually speaking to it from their perspective of what matters to them is not whether they do or they don't want to engage with the cops on that day. Because laws like that can actually get used both with discretion by the police, but also with discretion by the Indigenous community as, hey, I want to torment the cops that day. So they're provocational. That relationship authority. And mountain biking has that, you know, it's got this whole, yeah, we're not really gov, you know, we're not really here to tell you what to do. We're out here to have a bit of fun, you know, like just don't make sure no one gets hurt. And if you do, you know, we get up and we shake it off and laugh. So yeah, a lot of those kind of perspectives, I would say. There's a whole lot of invisible victories, you know, the things that don't happen. The racism that didn't happen because, you know, mountain biking came into the perspective, you know, that program. You know, as far as I know, no one got robbed riding a flash bike through South Kempsey, you know, coming in. We've never had any of that negative interaction which otherwise could have happened, and that doesn't get measured. That doesn't, you know, when there's a drama in a community and, you know, something bad happens, we look at that negativity, you know, the sort of, you know, focus on the negative thing, but there's a whole lot of good things that you just go, oh yeah, take for granted because that's normal. So yeah, mountain biking offered a lot of opportunities to fill that space. But yeah, there's a big schism there between the individual sports and the collective sports and the way in which they move through a community.
Okay, well, as if by magic, Jai, we've finished just ahead of time, and Fiona sends her apologies. She's just had to nip off and go and collect the child. She's had a message that she's got to shoot, so that's why she's no longer on the call. Folks, it's been an absolute pleasure engaging with all of you. Thank you, Jai. Thank you, Fiona. It's been fantastic, as it always is on these calls, and it's a real pleasure to listen to people speak and to have such engaging, thought-provoking discussion. If you've been on the call, if you're watching this at some point in the future, go away, think about it, reflect on it, be reflexive, Dan. Advocate for mountain bikers, include this in your advocacy, and use this evidence that we're collecting to kind of influence your practice in the future. And if you can do just a little bit of that, then we've made a real difference in this kind of emerging subdiscipline of mountain biking. Just a reminder that the next session is on the 24th of April, again 6 p.m. British Standard Time, where we'll be hearing from myself, Tom Campbell, around European trail building standards. We've also got Jan Arvidsson from Denmark and colleagues coming to speak to us about how the public can help influence and support mountain bike trail building in major cities. But that's about it from us for the time being. Hoping to see as many of you as possible at the next sessions. Also, as a reminder, if you've got anybody who you feel including yourselves, who might want to contribute to the 2 remaining slots available on the seminar series, then please do get in touch directly, and I'm sure we can sort that out. But for the time being, it's been great to catch up with you all, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care and see you then.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.